For decades, people called him Hollywood's kindest soul. They saw a man who stayed humble in an industry that often rewards ego, someone whose quiet compassion never seemed to fade no matter how famous he became. Over the course of 40 years, Keanu Reeves endured heartbreak after heartbreak. He lost his closest friend. He experienced the unimaginable pain of losing his daughter. He watched the woman he loved slip away. Yet through every devastating chapter, he never allowed grief to harden him. He remained calm, generous, and deeply present with everyone around him. But what Joy Behar failed to recognize was one simple truth that would soon change everything. Kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Those two things couldn't be further apart, and what unfolded on The View would soon explode across the internet, becoming one of the year's most talked about television moments. Not because Keanu raised his voice, not because he lost control or walked away. It was because he remained perfectly composed, locked eyes with Joy, and responded with such calm precision that the entire conversation flipped against her. Before we get into this unforgettable exchange, take a second to subscribe and leave a comment below, because this is the moment millions realized that the gentlest man in Hollywood could also be the most impossible person to intimidate. From the moment filming began that Wednesday morning, something about the studio felt different. Even the crew sensed an unusual energy hanging in the air, though no one could quite explain why. Maybe it was because the guest sitting backstage was someone audiences almost never saw in this setting. Keanu Reeves wasn't known for making daytime talk show appearances. He rarely chased publicity, avoided the endless media circuit, and preferred living quietly outside the spotlight. He spoke when he genuinely had something to say, then disappeared from public view just as quickly as he arrived. But on this day, he calmly took his seat across from the panel, wearing the peaceful expression that had become instantly recognizable around the world. "Welcome back to The View, Keanu," Whoopi Goldberg said with genuine warmth. "It's been far too long." Keanu offered a grateful smile before answering in his trademark gentle voice, soft yet somehow powerful enough to fill the entire studio. "Thank you for having me. It's really good to be here." The audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. These weren't just movie fans. They were people who had grown up laughing through Bill and Ted, been captivated by The Matrix, and watched John Wick fight impossible battles. They admired him not only because of the characters he played, but because of the person they believed he truly was. Sarah Haynes opened the conversation with easy questions about his latest projects, giving the interview a relaxed rhythm. Keanu spoke about Outcome, the dark comedy he filmed with Jonah Hill. He shared his excitement about The Entertainment System Is Down, the A24 project, directed by Ruben Östlund, and reflected on Ballerina and the ever-expanding John Wick universe, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who genuinely loved his craft, rather than the fame that came with it. "You're 61 and still performing these incredible action scenes," Sarah said with admiration. "What's the secret?" Keanu smiled, the kind of effortless smile that instantly put everyone at ease. "Training," he replied with a light laugh. "A lot of training, and an incredible team of stunt coordinators and performers who make me look much better than I really am." The humility didn't feel rehearsed. It never had. That authenticity was exactly why so many people respected him. But what no one realized was that this very humility was about to become Joy Behar's target. Throughout the opening conversation, Joy had remained unusually quiet. Viewers who followed the show closely recognized the pattern immediately. The faint smirk, the repeated glances toward her notes, the patient silence of someone waiting for exactly the right opening. Then, without warning, she leaned forward. "Keanu," she said, her tone suddenly sharper than before. "There's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time." Keanu turned toward her without hesitation, giving her his full attention with the same calm curiosity he had shown everyone else. "Of course," he answered. "What would you like to know?" Joy gestured casually before speaking. This whole nice guy image. The stories about giving up your subway seat, helping strangers on the roadside, sharing your salary with crew members. It's certainly impressive. But don't you think people are starting to get a little tired of the performance? The room instantly went silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. In front of a live audience, Joy Behar had just suggested that Keanu Reeves' kindness was nothing more than an elaborate act. Yet Keanu didn't flinch. There wasn't even the slightest sign of irritation on his face. He simply looked at her with complete composure and quietly asked, "What performance are you referring to?" Joy let out a brief laugh, but there was no warmth behind it. "Oh, come on," she replied. "Nobody is that nice all the time. Nobody gives away millions without expecting something in return. You've spent 40 years in Hollywood. Surely you understand how this business really works." Around the table, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The other hosts exchanged uneasy looks. Whoopi slowly reached for her coffee, clearly preparing to step in before the conversation went too far. But then Keanu calmly lifted one hand, politely signaling that he wanted to answer the question himself. And what happened next changed everything. "Joy," Keanu said quietly, never raising his voice, "I think kindness and performance are two very different things." Joy leaned forward without hesitation, her expression sharpening. "Are they?" she challenged. "In Hollywood, everything is a performance. Every interview, every public appearance, every charitable gesture is carefully designed to build an image. And your image just happens to be the nice guy." Instead of arguing, Keanu gave a slow nod, as though he was honestly considering her point of view. "That's an interesting way to see it," he replied calmly. Then, after a brief pause, he asked, "May I ask you something?" The question caught Joy off guard. She had expected resistance, maybe even frustration, but not quiet curiosity. "Go ahead," she answered. Keanu looked at her with complete sincerity before asking, "If your first instinct is to believe kindness must always be calculated, what does that say about the way you see the world?" The entire room seemed to freeze. His words didn't sound like an attack. They sounded like an invitation to think. Yet somehow, they landed with even greater force. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Keanu continued. His voice still gentle, though now carrying a depth that everyone in the studio could feel. "I've been reflecting on that idea lately," he said. "The belief that every good deed must have a hidden motive. That nobody helps another person unless they're expecting something back. To me, that's an incredibly lonely way to experience life." Joy quickly straightened herself. "I'm not lonely," she fired back. "I'm realistic. I've spent enough years in this business to know everyone has an angle." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Everyone?" he asked softly. "That's an awful lot of people to stop believing in." Joy shook her head. "I don't distrust everyone. I'm simply skeptical of people who seem too good to be true." Keanu settled back into his chair, and while his calm demeanor never changed, something about him suddenly felt different. The kindness was still there, but beneath it was a quiet confidence that made the entire conversation feel heavier. "Joy," he said after a thoughtful pause, "I'm going to share something I don't usually talk about during interviews." For the first time since the exchange began, uncertainty flickered across Joy's face. She nodded cautiously, unsure where he was taking the conversation. Keanu took a slow breath before speaking. "When I was younger, my best friend, River Phoenix, died far too young. He was only 23 years old. He was one of the most gifted people I've ever known, and in a single moment, he was gone." His voice never wavered, but every word carried unmistakable weight. "A few years later, Jennifer and I were expecting our daughter. We had already chosen her name, Ava. The studio had become so silent that even the smallest movement seemed loud. She was stillborn on Christmas Eve in 1999, just months before she was due. Jennifer was devastated, and neither of us ever truly recovered from that loss. Eventually we separated, though we stayed close. We had started finding our way back to each other, and then she was killed in a car accident. He paused, allowing the heartbreaking truth to settle over the audience. No one spoke. No one moved. For a long time after that, Keanu continued quietly. I kept asking myself why I was still here while so many people I loved were gone. Eventually, I realized I had a choice. I could become bitter, or I could spend whatever time I had left trying to make someone else's life a little easier. Not because I wanted attention. Not because I was building an image. Simply because, after everything I'd lost, it felt like the only way life still made sense. Joy's expression changed completely. The confidence she had carried into the conversation disappeared, replaced by visible discomfort. Whatever point she had planned to make next seemed to vanish. But Keanu wasn't finished. "You asked why I share my earnings with crew members," he said. "It's because I remember what it feels like to struggle. Those people work incredibly hard, often without recognition, and if I can make their lives a little better, why wouldn't I? Money means far less to me than knowing the people around me feel respected." He leaned forward slightly, never breaking eye contact. "You asked why I stand on the subway so someone else can sit. The answer is simple. If another person needs something more than I do, and I can give it without losing anything important, then that's the obvious thing to do. There's no strategy behind it. No calculation. Just a choice to treat another human being with dignity." Joy tried to regain control of the conversation. "That's a moving story," she said carefully. "But surely you understand why people become skeptical in an industry like this. Nice people don't usually survive here." Keanu smiled gently, though there was sadness behind it. It was the smile of someone who had witnessed more pain than most people could imagine. "You're right," he replied. "This industry can be incredibly harsh. I've watched talented people lose themselves because of it, but I've also seen kindness accomplish things success never could. I've watched one thoughtful gesture completely change someone's day. I've met crew members years later who still remembered that someone simply learned their name or asked how their family was doing. Those moments stay with people." Then his expression grew more serious, and the room seemed to tighten once again. "What I find fascinating, Joy," he said quietly, "is how determined you seem to be to prove kindness isn't real, that everyone must secretly see the world the same way you do." He paused for just a moment before asking the question that stopped the conversation cold. "What happened in your life that convinced you to believe that?" Suddenly, the silence in the studio spoke louder than anyone else could. Joy's expression tightened, and for the first time since the interview began, her confidence seemed to crack. A flush spread across her face as she quickly defended herself. "I'm not cynical," she insisted. "I'm realistic." "There's a difference." Keanu met her gaze without the slightest hint of anger. "Is there?" he asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you've built a career assuming the worst about people. You expect the darkest motive before you've even considered the possibility of a good one. You create conflict because conflict keeps people watching." Around the table, the other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the reserved Keanu Reeves audiences thought they knew. He wasn't losing his temper or raising his voice. He was simply refusing to let his character be defined by someone else's assumptions. "That's not fair," Joy replied, her voice growing sharper. "I ask difficult questions." "That's my job." Keanu nodded slightly before answering with calm certainty. "Difficult questions have value. They expose truth. They challenge power. They hold people accountable. But what you've been doing for the last several minutes isn't about finding truth. It's about trying to tear down someone's character while calling it journalism." Joy started to interrupt, but Keanu continued before she could regain control of the conversation. Every word was measured, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "You looked at someone who has spent years trying to treat people with kindness, someone who shared success with the people around him, someone who simply tried to leave things a little better than he found them. And instead of asking why, your first instinct was to prove it couldn't possibly be genuine. I have to ask, what does that accomplish? Who benefits from convincing people that kindness can't exist? The audience deserves honesty, Joy fired back, though this time there was an unmistakable tremor in her voice. Keanu smiled gently, almost sympathetically. Honesty, he repeated. Then let's be honest. I've made mistakes. More than enough. I've never claimed to be perfect. I'm just another person trying to navigate a world that can be incredibly painful. He gestured calmly toward Joy before continuing. But here's another truth. You have a platform that reaches millions of people every single day. That's an incredible responsibility. You can use it to encourage compassion, curiosity, and understanding. Or you can teach people that every act of kindness must hide a selfish motive. You can make the world a little more hopeful, or a little more suspicious. The audience, which had remained silent until then, shifted almost as one. The atmosphere inside the studio had changed completely. The conversation was no longer just an interview. It had become something much bigger. Keanu paused for a moment before speaking again, his voice softer than ever, yet somehow carrying even greater weight. Do you know what I've noticed about people who refuse to believe goodness exists? He asked. Sometimes it's because accepting that kindness is real forces them to confront a difficult truth. That cruelty isn't inevitable. It's a choice. Those words hung over the studio with undeniable force. Joy abruptly pushed back her chair and stood, the sharp scrape echoing across the silent set. Her face reflected a mixture of anger and disbelief. I don't have to sit here while an actor psychoanalyzes me, she snapped. Keanu didn't move. He remained exactly where he was, calm and composed. You're absolutely right, he replied. You don't. But before you leave, I'd like you to think about one thing. Joy hesitated, one hand resting on the back of her chair. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Every single day, Keanu continued, all of us make a choice. We can use our words to tear people down or to build them up. We can spread distrust or inspire hope. We can assume the worst in people or make the effort to look for the best. Those choices shape far more than we realize. He held her gaze for one final moment. You've made your choice. I sincerely hope that one day you'll decide to make a different one. The silence that followed was unlike anything the audience had experienced all morning. Joy remained frozen where she stood, her expression shifting rapidly between anger, embarrassment, and something far more difficult to define. Finally, she took a slow breath. I think I need a moment, she said quietly. Excuse me. Without another word, she turned and walked off the set, leaving Keanu seated exactly where he had been, surrounded by stunned co-hosts and an audience struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The cameras followed her as she disappeared backstage, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the studio. It was the kind of moment no one expected to see unfold on live television. Back at the table, nobody seemed to know what to say. Sarah Haynes stared silently at the papers in front of her, as though searching for an explanation that wasn't there. Alyssa Farah Griffin glanced repeatedly toward the producers behind the cameras, hoping someone would signal what came next. Even Whoopi Goldberg, who had navigated countless tense moments over the years, looked genuinely surprised by how quickly everything had escalated. After several long seconds, she finally cleared her throat. Well, she said carefully, I think this might be a good time to take a quick commercial break. Before anyone could move, Keanu gently shook his head. If everyone doesn't mind, he said softly, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. Whoopi gave a small nod, still processing everything that had just unfolded. She clearly wasn't sure where this was going, but she quietly gave Keanu the space to finish. Keanu turned toward the camera, speaking directly to everyone watching at home. If you've ever been told that your kindness isn't real, that your compassion must have a hidden motive, that helping other people somehow makes you naive. I want you to remember something. Don't let cynical people convince you to stop caring. Don't allow those who've lost faith in goodness to steal yours as well. This world doesn't need less compassion. It needs far more of it. And whenever someone mocks you for choosing kindness, they're often revealing far more about themselves than they are about you. He paused for a brief moment before smiling, the same warm, genuine smile that audiences had admired for decades. Be excellent to each other, he said softly. It really is that simple. The studio instantly erupted into applause. This wasn't the routine applause encouraged by producers. It was spontaneous, emotional, and completely sincere. Everyone in the room knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. Within hours, clips from the interview had spread across social media at incredible speed. Headlines claiming that Keanu Reeves had answered criticism with nothing but calm and compassion quickly dominated online conversations. The discussion exploded far beyond entertainment news, with countless articles exploring the difference between wisdom and cynicism, strength and gentleness. Public figures began sharing personal stories about quiet moments of generosity they had experienced with Keanu over the years, while commentators debated whether the interview had exposed something much bigger than a simple disagreement. One conclusion kept surfacing again and again. Keanu had defended himself without shouting, without losing control, and without becoming the person he had been accused of being. People who had worked alongside him for years began adding their own memories to the conversation. Stunt performers, crew members, longtime collaborators, and friends described someone who treated every person on set with respect, remembered names, expressed gratitude, and never viewed kindness as something extraordinary. To them, it wasn't an image. It was simply who he had always been. More voices continued joining the conversation, each one reinforcing the same message. Directors praised his professionalism, co-stars spoke about his generosity behind the scenes, and longtime friends reflected on the quiet consistency that had defined him throughout his career. Those closest to him didn't describe a celebrity carefully protecting a reputation. They described a man who behaved the same way whether cameras were present or not. Even the smallest public gestures from the people who knew him best carried unmistakable meaning. For them, there was nothing surprising about what had happened that day. They believed the rest of the world had simply witnessed the same person they had known all along. Meanwhile, somewhere away from the cameras, Joy sat alone with her own thoughts. The bright lights of the dressing room reflected back every expression as the conversation replayed in her mind. For the first time in a long while, there were no prepared responses, no quick jokes, and no clever comeback waiting to rescue the moment. Only one question remained, echoing louder with every passing minute. Why had kindness seemed so impossible to believe? It was a question that refused to disappear, lingering long after the cameras stopped rolling. Whether it changed anything only she could know, but it was clear that the conversation had reached far beyond television. It had become something deeply personal. As for Keanu Reeves, he quietly thanked the remaining hosts, exchanged a few respectful goodbyes, and walked off the set with the same calm humility he had carried throughout his entire career. He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He simply left the way he had arrived, with quiet grace and unwavering dignity. In the end, the moment reminded millions of people of something surprisingly simple. Kindness isn't the opposite of strength. Sometimes, kindness is strength in its purest form. What do you think? Did Keanu handle the situation exactly the right way, or would you have responded differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories that will keep you watching until the very end.